And Mr. Russell Snyder and I were driving by there one day, and I said, Russell, I'd like to build my house right here. We drove on through the pasture, and a week or two I went back up there. It's a ground level. It's two-level house. The creek comes up underneath, and then the bank's up here. And a few weeks later, I was up by the ranch there, and there was the dirtiest hole you ever saw. And he had brought the equipment up there and dug out for me to build my house right there where I wanted it, you know. And we built that house, it was 83 years, 83 or 84. And I've been living there, right there on the same ranch for 85 years as tomorrow.
That's pretty amazing. You mentioned the Model T Ford. I think there are some old cars in the Storm family as well. It does seem like a common thread in Texas ranching. You've got to have a Model T or some strong truck out there that'll go through rivers and go up and down pretty steep hills. But talk a little bit, if you would, about those old cars, or switch to the new modern.
Well, I'll tell you real quickly about the old car. I think he's referring to is my dad's 1916 Neely, which is an open touring car with chrome sidebar thing. What do you call those, Scott? Superchargers?
Leg spikes.
Okay. Well, it's quite a sight. Crank it up, put, ooga, ooga. It's wonderful. It doesn't work right now, but we hope to have it restored yet again so that it can be driven in parades and around the ranch. Anyway, we love it. We wouldn't part with it for anything. And it's pretty rare. Anyway, that car actually was given to my grandmother, Storm, when she and my dad and his brothers lived in El Paso, when they were moving back up to the States from Mexico. This gentleman who'd been in the First World War, I believe he was an officer of some kind. He lived across the street, and this was his staff car. And he saw my grandmother in need of a car and said, "You need this car much more than I do," so he gave it to him, which is a wonderful, wonderful gift. And my dad and his brothers drove the car from the time they could see through the steering wheel. So it didn't matter how old you were to drive a car in those days. And they drove it from Austin to New Mexico on the dirt ruts between. You had to open fences to let yourself through, and people drove across country, and they were, depending upon the conditions of the ground, they would either drive in somebody else's old ruts or they would make new ones, because if it had been muddy, the ruts would get too deep and you would get high center and you couldn't go anywhere. Otherwise, he said that the road extended in fields like half an acre wide, because people would spread out and head off to the west. Anyway, they took turns driving to New Mexico and back every summer. And that's the story of our old car, which we still have.
Great. Let's switch to horses for a moment. You spent your whole life around horses. Many of our friends here today have not had the opportunities you've had to be a professional horse person. What is it about horses that got you into that world? How did you know you were passionate about training horses, riding horses, showing horses?
Well, my mom and my aunt rode while I was growing up, and I wanted to be a part of that. I noticed that their horses, you could control them, but you never really knew exactly what was going to happen at any given time. So when I got my first pony, I was bucked off after someone told me, keep kicking her, and she finally bucked me off. And I thought, man, if I'm going to ride horses, I'm going to have to teach them to not buck me off. So the next horse I got, it had some bad habit, and pretty soon when I figured out that I could change a horse's behavior, I was hooked. That's really what hooked me. And then I was fortunate enough to spend a lot of time there at Storm Ranch while my grandmother had a knee replacement. I lived with them to help her out. And I met Bob Buckholz, whose brother David, they ran, well, their family lived across the highway, but they trained quarter horses and really had a good reputation for being able to put a good handle on a horse. And I started learning from them different techniques in the round pen of how to start horses under saddle. After I started helping them put miles on their young horses, then I started looking for other trainers who would give me new ideas. There was an emerging trend of training horses using behavioral techniques rather than forcing them by roping hind legs up, bucking them out, that kind of thing. And so I heard about a man called Ray Hunt who started talking about that horses use body language to try and communicate with each other, and that if you could learn a little bit of that body language, then you would be able to communicate with the horse and change its behavior using its own language. So I started going to listen to him and watch him training horses. He really knew what he was doing. I knew because he went to the 4-6s, big ranch y'all probably heard of out in West Texas, and taught those cowboys every year how to start their young horses in the spring. So I trained under him and under a couple of other trainers, and that's just what I've done ever since. And it's a wonderful thing. I work with people now and teaching them how to train and correct behavior problems in their horses, and I also teach riding, and then I still, believe it or not, ride for fun. Lots of people go, you ride all the time. You ride in your spare time also? And I really do. That's just, it's my therapy.
How many horses do you take care of?
I have 23 right now. It's a little much. It's kind of over the top. But my husband and I got into this, well, we didn't think of it at the time, but it kind of turned out we were collecting horses. We thought we were raising horses, but just more and more started appearing. So we have 23 right now, but you know, when you have that many horses, you can't help but be a horse trader to a certain extent. And so as I get another horse finished, I sell it. And then somebody tells me about this really cool horse that they saw, and I end up, oh, well, I can't live without that one, so then I buy another one. So it's a never-ending, it's a vicious circle.
Thank you. Let's change just for a moment, Lynn. I noticed you brought one of my favorite books with you today. If you could talk a little bit about that and the role your family played in authoring that book.
This thing doesn't like me at all.
I'm sorry, I'm not a good sound technician. My bad.
Is that better? Can you still hear me? Is it
No.
working? Okay. This book was put out by the Hays County Commission, Historical Commission. It was written by several women in the county, and they collaborated back in the 70s, and it's a fascinating book full of pictures and history of all the communities of Hays County. I recommend it. It's kind of hard to find. I don't know if it's been reissued at the by the Historical Commission, but if it has, it's probably available at least through the county courthouse in some fashion or other. But if you really want to know about Hays County, this is one place to go. There are individual books about different communities, but this one is very comprehensive.
Right, and my grandmother is one of the contributors, Lynne Storm. We talk a lot about my grandfather. He was the head of the family, but my grandmother was the neck that turned the head.
RB, you mentioned you had seen Onion Creek get up a little bit. For folks not familiar with Onion Creek, when that creek comes down, we're talking 20, 30-foot rises. Lynn, you mentioned the big drought of the 50s. Talk a little bit, if y'all would, about that impact on the business of ranching where, you know, we say if you don't like the weather, just wait a minute, it'll change. But one day it's flooding and the next day we have a drought. And how have you gotten through those times and what adjustments have you had to make to cope with all that?